computer. All right. So chapter 23 is microorganisms in the environment and their effect on human health. We should understand that microbes are a big part of nutrient cycling, okay, and mineral cycling. And as a result, all right, they allow the environment to regenerate itself, okay? If we look at the structure of life on the planet, okay, um, you might remember from A and P that we go from the molecular level to the cellular level to the tissue level to the organ level to the organ system level to the organism level, and then above that, groups of the same organism are populations. Okay, groups of populations are guilds. Groups of guilds are communities, and groups of communities are habitats. Okay, physical locations where organisms are found, consisting of groups of microhabitats. Okay, and then above that are ecosystems, and then above that is the biosphere. Right, that's all the areas on the planet that have life in it. And then if we diagram that, you can see here, right? Organism, okay, to population, to guild, to community, to habitat, okay, to ecosystem, to biosphere, from the most inclusive, or from the least inclusive to the most inclusive category, okay, building up in complexity. All right. There are cycles that allow nutrients and minerals to be reused as life on the planet continues to exist and procreate. Okay. The cycles we're going to look at: the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, the phosphorus cycle, okay, the sulfur cycle. All of these have both biological and we could call them physical components. Okay. The carbon cycle is important because all life is based on carbon. Now, why is all life based on carbon? All life is based on carbon because carbon can do the one thing that no other element in the periodic table can do, which is it can form rings and chains with itself, which means you can build a lot of very interesting stuff with carbon as a backbone. Okay. It's the sixth most abundant element in the universe. It's the backbone of all organic molecules. It's a primary biogeochemical cycle. The nitrogen cycle, which we'll look at next, is the most abundant gas in the Earth's atmosphere. It's over 70%. Nitrogen is necessary for all living organisms. It's involved in the synthesis of proteins, nucleic acids, and other nitrogen-containing compounds such as ATP. Okay. So nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, all of that, critical. So let's take a look at how the carbon cycle works.
Pile of coal. The sun's awesome energy. Cloud-patched sky. A pony grazing. They're all very different. They all share one very important thing in common. They're all involved in one way or the other in the carbon cycle, one of nature's most important recycling processes. All life, be it animal, plant, fungi, or any other kind, depends on certain key chemicals for its very existence. Without these all-important chemicals, there can be no life, no living organisms of any kind. And here, in the form of coal, is one of the most important of these chemicals: carbon. Carbon is a must for all life. All living organisms, be they buttercups or birds, must have carbon to make the carbohydrates, fats, and proteins that are at the very heart of living. Carbon atoms are, for example, so vital to us humans that they make up more than 18% of our bodies. Obviously, then, if all living things must have carbon atoms to exist, it's life and death critical that nature doesn't run out of them. And that brings us to an interesting question. After all the hundreds of millions of years that living things of one kind or the other have inhabited the planet Earth and used the carbon around them in the process, how is it that there are any carbon atoms left today? How is it that living things did not use up the Earth's supply of carbon atoms long, long ago? The answer is recycling. Organisms can still get the carbon atoms they need because nature recycles them, using them over and over again. To see how, let's begin by looking at some typical green plants. All green plants, no matter what kind they are or where they grow, play a key role in recycling carbon atoms and making them available for use time and time again. Green plants do this while making the sugar they use as food. The process is called photosynthesis, and the raw materials they use are water and carbon dioxide, a carbon-containing gas that's part of the air around us. Using energy from the sun, green plants, or as they're often called, producers, combine carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen atoms during photosynthesis to make the sugar they need. Plants then either break down this sugar to release energy, or they change it into cellulose, starch, or other carbon-rich chemicals. But regardless of what they do with the sugar they produce during the process, photosynthesis, during which green plants of all kinds take in carbon atoms from the atmosphere, makes up 1/2 of the carbon cycle. And here we see a herd of wild ponies. They're involved in the other half of the carbon cycle. They, like so many different animals, feed on grass and other green plants. When the ponies, or other so-called consumers, eat green plants, carbon atoms that are part of them pass into the ponies' digestive systems. Once there, some of the carbon-containing plant tissues are broken apart, releasing energy. Other carbon atoms from the plant material are changed into new chemicals that become part of the ponies' bodies and milk. At the same time, the ponies exhale carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, completing the carbon cycle. On one side of the cycle, green plants take in carbon atoms from the air and make them part of their tissues. And on the other, animals that eat those green plants return carbon atoms to the atmosphere when they exhale. So far today, we've discussed how the carbon cycle works with living plants and animals. In addition, it's important to understand that dead organisms, such as this decomposing log and rotting leaf litter, or this dead fish, also play an important part in the carbon cycle. When organisms die, they decompose or rot. This is largely brought about through the actions of bacteria and fungi, such as the one we see here helping to decompose this log. These and other so-called decomposers feed on dead organisms, using some of the carbon in the dead tissues to build their own bodies. Much of the remaining carbon in the dead organism is, however, returned to the atmosphere as the carbon dioxide that's a byproduct of the decomposer's own respiration. Green plants of all kinds can then use these newly freed carbon atoms during photosynthesis. So far today, we've talked about what's called the biological, or short, carbon cycle. As we've seen, it involves the relatively rapid recycling of carbon atoms back and forth between the atmosphere and living organisms. Nature is not, however, always so quick. Some carbon atoms do not recycle nearly so rapidly. Here, for example, along the banks of this Virginia River, we find a perfect illustration of such delayed recycling of carbon atoms trapped out of circulation for millions of years. What today are riverbank cliffs were millions of years ago thick layers of mud at the bottom of a shallow sea once covered this area. These cliffs are world famous for the fossils found in them. Fossils such as these clams that once flourished in the ancient sea's warm waters. When they were alive, the clams extracted carbon atoms from the carbon dioxide dissolved in the seawater around them, and combined it with other chemicals to form their shells and tissues. Fossils and deposits of limestone and other carbon-rich rocks hold huge numbers of carbon atoms trapped and keep them from being recycled for millions of years. It's only when such material weathers and breaks down that these carbon atoms are freed and thus made available for use again. Fossils are, however, just one of the ways in which carbon can be trapped out of circulation. Gasoline, coal, heating oil, and other such fuels hold still other carbon atoms captive for millions of years. These fossil fuels were formed from the remains of organisms that lived millions of years ago, and carbon atoms trapped within them will not be free to circulate through nature again until we burn them as fuel. When that happens, whenever anything burns, carbon atoms are released in the form of carbon dioxide. And that brings us to what many scientists feel is a pressing environmental problem: global warming. Ever since the industrial age began in the 1800s, we have burned increasing amounts of coal, oil, and other fossil fuels. Today, our factories and vehicles continue to pour huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So much, in fact, that the world's green plants can't remove the surplus by photosynthesis. The ever-increasing amount of carbon dioxide that our vehicles and factories continue to discharge into the air around us has upset the natural carbon recycling mechanism we've talked about so far today, and substantially increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Many scientists are worried by this. They fear that the increased amount of carbon dioxide will act as a blanket that will cause unnatural warming and other possibly disastrous related environmental changes. We still have much to learn about global warming and its impact on the environment. However, whatever we discover will not change the fact that the carbon cycle is and will remain the way in which carbon atoms upon which all life depends, are made available for use time and time again.
The nitrogen cycle. Hold on.
Because the Earth is finite, matter has to be reused and recycled over and over again. Because the Earth is finite, matter has to be reused and recycled over and over again. So the atoms that are in you were once in the air, in soil, in water, and in rocks. These atoms have also been used by countless other living things, from dinosaurs to broccoli plants to Abraham Lincoln. And after they leave you, they will become part of other living things or of the environment. This recycling of matter is known as a nutrient cycle, and there are several different nutrient cycles for different elements. Today, we will focus on the nitrogen cycle, the process by which the element nitrogen moves around in ecosystems. The nitrogen cycle is crucial for all life on Earth because nitrogen is needed to make some of the most important molecules for life, including DNA, RNA, and proteins that are needed by all living things. Without nitrogen, there would be literally no life as we know it. So it's important to understand at least a little bit about how the nitrogen cycle works, right? So let's get into it. Nitrogen gas, N2, makes up about 78% of our atmosphere. You breathe it in and out all the time. In fact, you're doing it right now. The problem with N2 is that you can't use it to make any of the cool molecules we just discussed. The 3 bonds between the nitrogen atoms in N2 make it very hard to break apart, so you can't do any reactions to make DNA or RNA or proteins or anything else. The nitrogen atoms are essentially superglued together. Luckily, there are certain bacteria that can break the triple bond of nitrogen gas to make something that organisms can use. These bacteria are called nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and they are found in the soil and in root nodules of certain plants known as legumes, as well as a few other places. These nitrogen-fixing bacteria break nitrogen gas apart and add hydrogen atoms to it to form ammonia, NH3, or ammonium, NH4+.
We can fix it. Yes, we can.
What's the matter with you? You put another H on.
Are you really? You freak.
Ammonia. It's be the same. Just cyanide. This process moves nitrogen from the air to the soil. It's called nitrogen fixation because the nitrogen in the air is getting fixed
what?
that other living things can use.
What?
Ammonia can
Yo,
be taken up by plants
you drive
and used to make
horrendous,
important
bro.
biological molecules like
Fucking
DNA
horrendous.
and proteins, etc. This process of uptake and production of biological molecules is called assimilation.
Everyone.
But not all of the ammonia produced by nitrogen fixation gets assimilated into plants. Too much ammonia can be toxic, and sometimes plants prefer to assimilate other nitrogen compounds called nitrates. Our next step is the conversion of ammonia into nitrate, a process called nitrification.
Hey, we already fixed it. Discerning plants prefer nitrates.
Nitrification is done by nitrifying bacteria. These bacteria oxidize or add oxygen to ammonia in chemical reactions that first convert the ammonia to nitrite, NO2-, and then to nitrate, NO3-. Because oxygen is needed for these reactions, nitrification happens best in soils that are well aerated. Like ammonia, nitrate is a plant fertilizer because it can be assimilated and used to make molecules, DNA, RNA, proteins, etc. Once nitrogen is inside of plants and used to build our sweet biomolecules, it can pass to other living things through food webs. When an animal eats the plant, the nitrogen-containing compounds in the plant move to the animal. When that animal gets eaten, nitrogen moves to the predator. Eventually, all living things die and decompose. This returns the nitrogen back to the soil as ammonia in a process called ammonification. This ammonia can now be used again by plants or converted to nitrates by nitrification. And so nitrogen gets cycled around and around over and over again. But we are still missing one key part of our cycle. In order to have a complete cycle, nitrogen gas needs to get back into the air.
She's
This
right
is done
there.
by denitrifying bacteria and is called denitrification.
Bro.
During denitrification, bacteria convert nitrates, NO3-, into nitrogen gas, N2. Denitrification happens best in low oxygen environments like waterlogged soils, and it reduces the fertility of the soil. This is one reason why it's harmful to overwater plants. So now we've completed the entire nitrogen cycle since we're back at our starting point of nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. Let's do a quick review. First, nitrogen fixation fixes nitrogen gas to make ammonia. This ammonia can be assimilated into plants or go through nitrification to make nitrates. Nitrates can also be assimilated by plants or undergo denitrification and be converted back into nitrogen gas. Also, nitrogen moves through food webs and is transferred whenever one organism eats another. When these organisms die, they get decomposed and their nitrogen becomes ammonia again via ammonification. And there you have it, the nitrogen cycle.
Now, to review and practice the nitrogen cycle, play the interactive game for free on the Bioman Biology website, biomanbio.com. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe. Thanks.
We got a new girlfriend. Check her out.
So sulfur cycle, 10th most abundant element in the universe, similar to the nitrogen cycle, includes atmospheric and terrestrial processes. The phosphorus cycle, essential nutrient for plants, animals, and microbes, can't be found in the atmosphere in a gaseous state, changes the phosphorus from insoluble to soluble forms.
We're going to be here for a little bit before I get like.
Let's do that. Let's do that. Let's do that. There we go. Okay. All right. The terrestrial process begins with weathering of rock, resulting in the release of stored sulfur. Then the sulfur comes in contact with air and is converted to a sulfate. A variety of natural sources emit sulfur directly into the atmosphere, including volcanic eruption, bacterial processes, decaying organisms, and evaporation of water. Because there's no gaseous form of phosphorus, it has a tendency to accumulate in the seas and other bodies of water. Fertilizers rich in phosphate and nitrogen are easily leached from the fields by rain and can result in the process known as eutrophication. Let's look at the sulfur cycle.
Welcome to Moo Math and Science in the sulfur cycle. All living things require sulfur in order to make protein. Let's take a look at how sulfur cycles itself around the Earth. First, sulfur reserves are found in the lithosphere and are released by weathering. In addition, hydrogen sulfide and sulfur dioxide gas is released into the atmosphere by volcanic eruptions, hot springs, and the decay of biological material in swamps and bogs. Marine algae produce dimethyl sulfide that enters the atmosphere as tiny droplets. Sulfur dioxide gas also forms when dimethyl sulfide reacts with oxygen gas. The burning of fossil fuels also releases sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. Sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen in the atmosphere and creates sulfur trioxide. The sulfur trioxide reacts with water in the atmosphere to produce sulfuric acid. Sulfur trioxide also reacts with the ammonia in the atmosphere to produce sulfate salts. The sulfuric acid and sulfate salts fall to the earth by precipitation like rainfall. The soil absorbs this sulfate salts. Plants then absorb the sulfur by absorbing the sulfate salts from the soil. Animals in turn get sulfur by eating the plants, and the animals release sulfur when they decay. As animals decay, they release sulfate salts and hydrogen sulfide. Anaerobic bacteria breaks down the hydrogen sulfide into sulfur gas, and the aerobic bacteria converts the sulfur into sulfate salts, which again the plants absorb. And then, like any other cycle, it just keeps going around and around. So there's the sulfur cycle. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness multiplies kindness. Be kind to somebody today.
Phosphorus. Hold on. Get it going.
Welcome to Moo Math and Science and the fall. Welcome to Moo Moo Math and Science and the phosphorus cycle. Along with the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle is another biogeochemical cycle that is essential for life on Earth. A biogeochemical cycle is a pathway by which a chemical substance moves through a biotic and the abiotic compartments of Earth. Although phosphorus is not found in the atmosphere, it still plays a very important role in plants and animals on Earth. Phosphorus is essential for plant and animal growth, as well as the health of microbes inhabiting the soil. Phosphorus is very important for the production of DNA and RNA, helps to make up cell membrane, and the production of ATP. The phosphorus cycle is a slow process and involves 4 key steps. Step 1, weathering. Phosphorus is found in rocks. Weathering, along with rain, breaks down the phosphorus in rocks and it travels to the soil and into water sources. Step 2 is absorption by plants and animals. Once in the soil, plants, fungi, microorganisms are able to absorb phosphorus and then grow. Some of it also makes its way to the ocean and fresh water, and animals are able to drink this water and absorb the phosphorus. Plants absorb the water along with the phosphorus, and then the animals eat the plants, and the phosphorus moves into the animal in this way also. Step 3, return to the environment by decomposition. Animals excrete waste, and decomposers are able to use the phosphorus in the waste material. Furthermore, when the plants and animals die, the bacteria convert the organic phosphorus into inorganic phosphorus in a process called mineralization. And then step 4, sediment to rocks. Some of the phosphorus gets buried in sediment, which over time becomes rocks, and the cycle continues. Some of the phosphorus in the soil gets washed to the ocean, where a similar process takes place. Plants and animals in the ocean absorb the phosphorus, die and decompose, and some of the phosphorus ends up as sediments in the rock. Humans have had a significant impact on the phosphorus cycle. Fertilizers containing phosphorus is added to the soil. This helps the plant grow. However, when the levels of phosphorus are too high, the overabundance of plant nutrients serves and drives excessive growth of algae. When these algae die, they can be toxic to the plants and animals in the ecosystem. If you'd like to know more about the phosphorus cycle, this playlist will help. And as always, thanks for watching. And Moo Moo Math uploads a new math and science video every day. Please.
Soil microbiology is dependent on moisture, oxygen, pH, temperature, and nutrients. Okay. Water is necessary for life, period. Okay. For a variety of reasons. Many things dissolve in water. It's a participant in chemical reactions. And it acts as a lubricant for secretions. It's a major component of cytoplasm. So many applications. All right. Oxygen is critical for the production of ATP for aerobic organisms. All right. Most moist soils are lower in oxygen content than dry ones. Waterlogged soil sees a decline in microbial diversity. Anaerobic organisms dominate as a result. pH influences the type of predominant organism. Highly acidic or basic soils will have fungi predominating, but bacteria prefer soil with a pH of around 7. Temperature determines the type of microbes that flourish. Most soil organisms are what are called mesophiles, okay? Psychrophiles only grow in cold environments. You can't survive in areas that experience thawing. Thermophiles grow only in warm environments where winters are not harsh. Nutrients, right, affects the microbial abundance and diversity. The majority of soil microbes are heterotrophic, meaning they have to get their carbon source to contain energy and building blocks in order to thrive. Influx of organic material supports a wide variety of microbes, more so than soil with low amounts of organic material. So we could say, look at the soil composition in a deciduous forest versus in a desert, okay? You can look at microbial populations through basically sampling, making a soil column. This will vary between different soil types. Bacteria are the most abundant and diverse inhabitants, fungi the next most, okay? Algae and protozoa are present in smaller numbers, okay? Protozoans are mobile and move around the soil, feeding on other microbes, especially bacteria. Although viruses are present within microbes, they're generally not found free. This method uses a column of soil that is organized with a number of areas that involve different growth environmental factors. These specific areas determine which bacterial populations thrive based on a number of growth requirements, such as oxygen, hydrogen sulfide, and light. Okay. Aquatic microbiology is going to vary by depth. Okay. Water occupies 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Freshwater and marine environments make up the aquatic ecosystem. This includes lakes, ponds, streams, rivers, estuaries, and oceans. Large numbers of microbes in the body of water reflect a high level of nutrients, often the result of contaminated inflows. This is a process known as eutrophication, right? The farmer fertilizes his soil. It has a lot of phosphorus, nitrogen, sulfur in it. The result is that the rain in the soil produces runoff, and then you get overgrowth of things like algae on the surface of the local bodies of water, and that creates anaerobic conditions beneath it. Okay, so you change the biodiversity there. Freshwater ecosystems are 3% of the world's water. Okay, 99% is frozen in glaciers and packed in ice or in aquifers. The rest is in lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. 4 distinct vertical zones in lakes and ponds: the littoral, limnitic, profundal, and benthic zone. Okay. The littoral zone is the area along the shoreline with considerable rooted vegetation and good light. The limnitic is well-lit upper layered water away from the shore. The profundal is deeper water located between the limnitic and is characterized by limited light and low temperature. The benthic zone is sediments at the bottom of the lake, including sediment surface as well as subsurface layers. So you can see it there, okay? Littoral, limnitic, okay? Profundal and benthic. Limnitic zone, phytoplankton and zooplankton. Why? Because of the light, okay? The phytoplankton are the plants, well, not the plants, but the photosynthetic organisms, so they need the light in order to thrive. And then that sets the stage for the rest of the ecosystem. Profundal zone, very diffuse light. Primary consumers are either attached to or crawl along sediments at the bottom of the lake. Purple and green sulfur bacteria predominate. The benthic zones are the sediments at the bottom of the lake. Life forms can tolerate cool temperatures and low oxygen. Okay. So in the benthic zone, we see desulfovibrio, which are methane producing bacteria, and Clostridium species. Okay. Profundal zone, primary consumers that are either attached to or crawl along sediments at the bottom of the lake. Limnetic zone, Pseudomonas, Cyclophagia, Caulobacter, and Hyphomicrobium. Okay, so you can see the different zones there. Okay. Marine ecosystems cover more than 70% of the Earth's surface. Different species range from plankton to fish and large mammals. They're divided into layers, as is freshwater. The 5th zone is known as the abyssal zone and accompanies the deep ocean trenches. Okay. The majority of marine microbes are present in the littoral zone, where light is readily available and nutrient levels are high. The benthic abyssal zones have sparse nutrients, but are still going to support microbial growth, especially around hydrothermal vents. Natural disasters disrupt these ecosystems. They include earthquakes, volcanic eruption, landslide, hurricane, tsunami, flood, and drought. Okay. Transmission of infectious disease is associated with flooding. Doesn't introduce new disease, but increases transmission. It includes food, water, and vector-borne disease, respiratory disease, water contact disease. Fecal contamination of drinking water is one of the primary sources. Standing water caused by overflow of rivers and heavy rain are infamous for breeding mosquitoes. An increase in the mosquito population enhances the potential for exposure of disaster-related populations and the emergency personnel. Tsunamis, immediate health concerns, clean drinking water, food and shelter, medical help for injuries, danger of contaminated water and insect exposure and environmental hazards, and the threat of waterborne disease. When a body of water, such as the ocean, is rapidly displaced, a series of enormous waves are created. That's a tsunami. Whenever water supplies are contaminated, sanitation systems are destroyed, the immediate threat comes from waterborne disease such as shigellosis, typhoid, Hep A and E, and cholera. Earthquakes, lack of basic necessities, loss of life, diseases, waterborne, foodborne, vectorborne. Hurricanes, the main threat of infectious disease depends on flooding. Vector-borne diseases are also a concern. Bioterrorism, the use of biological agents to produce terror, right, to incapacitate or kill people. Agents are placed in 3 categories for initial public health preparedness efforts, including A, B, and C. Okay. The CDC is the overall public health agency. The Division of Bioterrorism Preparedness and Response is involved in planning and improved surveillance, rapid lab diagnostics, enhanced communication, and stockpiling of therapeutic agents. Category A agents, easily transmitted from person to person, high mortality rates and potential for a major public health impact, potential to cause public panic and social disruption, requires special action for public health preparedness. Category A agents include anthrax, plague, tularemia, botulism. The agents are shown below. Okay. Other category A agents, smallpox, viral hemorrhagic fevers, such as Ebola, Marburg, Lassa, Machupo, Rift Valley, Congo Crimean, yellow, and dengue. Virus is shown to the left. Category B agents, less virulent than category A, less likely to be used as bioterrorism weapons, still have the potential as bioterrorism weapons, especially if genetically modified to increase virulence. Category B agents shown here. Okay. You might recognize them from some other diseases that we've already covered. Category C agents, number of different agents, including newly emerging infectious disease such as hantavirus and Nipah. As bioweapons, hantavirus and Nipah would have to be transmitted in aerosolized form. The role of first responders in bioterrorism. Hospitals and healthcare facilities are critical in medical needs and the isolation of suspected biological agents. Rapid response requires special awareness and procedure. Workers have to be aware of emergency procedures. Knowledge about proper use and disposal of personal protective equipment is critical. Okay? All right, let's take 15. Ba-ba-bum. There we go.